because we're among other folks. So we are going to get started with our program today. We've got our guests here from the Community Foundation. And I want to start off by saying that tonight is not a safe space. It is a sacred space. You are among practitioners of art, and they do this art as an extension of their livelihood, their identity, their survival, their imagination, their hope for utopia and liberation and resistance. So this is a sacred space. It's not a safe one, but it's a sacred one. So you all are going to use this mic. Be over here, micless, among the people. We can't even get our mics to work. You see what I'm saying? I'm starting already. God damn it. I got jokes. That's how I feel. Okay. Good?
Yeah. Want to use mine? Looks like we can share.
I want y'all to have your mics. Okay, how's that? How's that? Y'all hear me? Yeah. Yeah, you're good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. I thought it would be good to start with introductions. We've introduced ourselves. We are the Black Arts community. That's really all you need to know right now. But we need to know you, and so it'd be great to know you by name and to know you by your affiliation with the Community Foundation, sort of like what your role is. But I think because this conversation today is largely around race, right? We're having this conversation about racial equity, that we have you name yourselves, because I think some of us are not clear actually about your racial identity or your cultural, ethnic affiliation. So it'd be great to start with that. Whoever would like to go first, and then we'll go from there.
All right, here we go. That's loud, right? We're good? Hi. First, I want to thank everybody for being here, and Heather for the invitation, and even more importantly, the just joy of hearing live music. It's just, I may not be able to get past that. I miss it more than almost anything, so thank you for that. My name is Susan Grant. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white Jewish woman who grew up in Chicago, and I've lived in Atlanta since 1978. Or many people. I'd like to say I came here under duress. I was married briefly, and now I'm not. That was the beginning. I went to work on Ashby Street at my first job at Turner Outdoor Advertising, when there's still an Ashby Street, so that's good and date. My connection to West End. Turner Outdoor Advertising was headquartered there. Was Ted Turner's original business. His father started it, he sold it, and then committed suicide. Ted bought it back, and the corporate offices were located there. I graduated from college, put my then husband through law school, moved to Atlanta, and was working as a secretary in that front office. Behind me was the warehouse where the outdoor billboards were being made, and it was my introduction to the South, and I had no idea why I was here. So I had to learn that, and that journey was about culture, race, feminism, and resilience, I'd say. I spent 8 years at Turner. I left. I took another job. I put that company out of business in 11 weeks. Was unemployed. Negotiated for severance, and started selling syndication television programs for Norman Lear's companies, so Sanford and Son and the Jeffersons and Who's the Boss, to television stations in the Southeast, and I traveled all over the South. I got hired back by Turner after 10 years being gone, and I spent the next 20 years of my career there as a salesperson and executive, and ran CNN.com, which we started in a closet until it made a lot of money, and then I got retired. So in 2015, I started the next phase, which was a full-time community observer, listener, activist participating. Actually, that's where I first saw Frank Fernandez, he doesn't know this, by attending the West Side Future Fund meetings, because while I had lived here for a long time, I didn't know who everybody was. I knew their names, but I don't know what they looked like, and I didn't know how they appeared in person. I just knew that I had opinions of people that I had met, and I needed to participate by seeing them in action. And I got asked to volunteer on a committee at the Community Foundation. I've been serving on the board of the Morehouse School of Medicine for the last dozen years. I chair the board of Heifer International, which is the international nonprofit. I've been on that board for about a dozen years, and I volunteered for the Community Foundation. They asked me to join the board. I joined the board. They asked me to chair the board. Alicia Phillip was the CEO. As she left and stayed in Portugal, we started a search for our next CEO, the first time that the Community Foundation had searched for a CEO in 43 years. So we didn't think that would be too hard to find somebody great. I'm just kidding, because we also had a pandemic, and we did the search successfully, we believe. And so my role here is the board of directors, right? We're an all-volunteer group of civic people who have lots of different jobs, and we're different ages and different races and different genders and identities, who all care about the city of Atlanta. We are not, as a board, funders by trade. We are all either employed or retired in various different roles. And what I have learned in the corporate world in my years there is that when you're given a position, regardless of whether it's paid or unpaid, you have a brief moment of time to influence and use that power. And that power, to me, is if we're going to talk about equity, we're going to talk about racial equity, we're going to have to do what we say we do. So what we say and what we do is the measure of how I look at alignment. So we can't do that if our board is not representative, if the people on the board aren't part of the community. And the first task was to do that. The second task was to hire a CEO who believed in the same values, which we believe we have done, and we'll hear from him next. And the third is to keep that journey going and to be transformative in the work that we do.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Fernandez. I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. And I identify as Latino. I am the son of Cuban immigrants. I learned to speak English when I went to school, and I lived part of my childhood outside the country. So I have a kind of an immigrant perspective on a lot of things. As Susan said, I am relatively new to the Community Foundation. I've been here a little over about 10 and a half months. I've been in Atlanta for about 7.5 years. And so I've been learning a lot about Atlanta in that time, getting to know lots of different communities, and kind of getting the richness and diversity that is Atlanta. And I'm happy to be here. So would it be helpful to kind of start with a little bit of the intro we just talked about?
Actually,
or you want to do something else?
Yeah, I'm going to do a recap. Can I ask you a very direct question?
Sure.
Though? As a Latino person, do you identify as brown or white Latino?
I identify as brown.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to that. I think it's so important because a lot has transpired in the last year. Even for me, there's like a lot that I've forgotten, right? So I thought it would be really good to tee up this conversation by just doing a recap of what happened in the last year. I've been spending a week and a half putting this document together, and every time I attempt to write it, I have to take a nap. So I've been napping pretty extensively for the past. Activism is difficult work. Okay, here we go. March 2020, Georgia shuts down due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. May 2020, the New York Times publishes the names of 100,000 lives lost to COVID in the United States. Long existing economic and social disparities account for a disproportionate percentage of Black lives impacted by the virus. May 19, 2020, the Community Foundation, under Susan's leadership, Alicia Phillip and Lita Party, awarded $580,000 to 11 arts organizations through its Arts Fund, which was largely supported at that time by the Woodruff Foundation. Not one Black organization is awarded funds, even though Black organizations applied. May 22nd, Memorial Day Friday, I write on Facebook. Not one Black arts organization was awarded a grant so much for equity during a pandemic disproportionately killing Black folks. Over the course of 2 days, the community made 113 comments on that post, of which I'm going to highlight a few. Vicky Morrow of the National Black Arts Festival and one of the Black applicants in the first round. I believe some of us are more frustrated at this moment because we never really assumed that nonprofits that supported Black people and Black artists specifically would be supported by this foundation due to the strict criteria for funding. However, once the message was communicated this year about equity, so beyond equality, we expected something more. Tanae Traylor with the Candida Fund and a former Community Foundation employee wrote, "When we know better, we must do better. Let's insist future rounds be reflective of our region and arts community." Deborah Richardson, formerly with the Center for Civil and Human Rights and the Atlanta Women's Foundation. This series of grants were not decided based on proposal submissions. The foundation staff and art advisors made the decisions. Let's not forget this lesson again. It matters who's at the table. Audrey Jacobs with the Wish Foundation, another former Community Foundation employee. This is part of a much larger problem in philanthropy in Atlanta and beyond. The Community Foundation is just one of several foundations in the Metro Atlanta region with the ability to support organizations using a racial equity lens. The time to have the difficult and honest conversation about who is at the table making decisions and how those decisions are being made is long overdue. Who is using a racial equity lens to make funding decisions, who is not, and if not, why not? COVID-19 has shown a bright light on the disparities that have existed for many years. Let's make sure everyone sees the light and acts on it. Leslie Grady, the former VP of the Community Foundation. Audrey Jacobs, speak, sister, speak. As Deborah and you have said, it's all about who's at the table making the decisions. This includes the board, staff, and volunteers. Thank you for laying it out. It's way past time for change. May 25th, Memorial Day, Monday. Christian Cooper, a Black birdwatcher, asks Amy Cooper, a white woman, to leash her dog in Central Park as rules required. She refuses and then calls the police saying she fears for her life. Video of the incident goes viral. Later that day at 8 p.m. in Minneapolis, Officer Derek Chauvin murders George Floyd in front of a group of bystanders. Minneapolis fire personnel pronounced Floyd dead on the scene at 9:25 p.m. Protests erupt the next day in Minneapolis. As for the Arts Fund, neither Alicia or Lita reach out to the Black Arts Committee or issue an apology. Instead, Alicia posts on social media the following. We hope to have arts opportunities in the near future that speak to the diverse concerns and needs of Atlanta's arts community. We encourage as many groups as possible to apply. If you know of any groups that are on the fence about applying or want to know more about how grant recipients were chosen, we urge you to connect with the team members listed on the webpage here. They're happy to help. May 29, 2020. Alicia makes another post entitled, "We Hear You," in which she evades and lies about the facts behind the funding decision made with the first round, specifically as it relates to Black groups that applied and the racial composition of the review committee. By now, Minneapolis is on fire and Black Lives Matter protests start in Atlanta. May 31 to June 6, I survey over 60 Black arts organizations on the financial health of their operations and draft this definition on Black arts. Black arts and cultural organizations are defined as organizations that in their creation, exhibition, and or performance of art declare their Blackness and further identify it in name, mission, and or target audience. These organizations are often founded and or led by leaders of African descent. I review the Community Foundation's grant lines and application and note requirements such as budget size minimum, paid financial audits, and paid full-time staff redline Black arts groups. The guidelines also state that the foundation will prioritize organizations that engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but nowhere in the application were applicants required to address this criteria. My colleague, Josh Phillipson, with the Atlanta Regional Commission and former Community Foundation employee, compiles data on the Arts Fund's 27-year giving history, looking at the race of a grantee's executive leader as a proxy for the racial identity of the organization. What Josh learns and admits to complicity in for the time he worked at the foundation is that Alicia Phillip and the fund director, Lisa Kremen, have been excluding Black arts organizations since the inception of the Arts Fund. Over the course of 27 years, 86% of funding totaling $13.1 million has been awarded to 69 white-led groups, while only 11%, totaling 1.6 million, has gone to 12 black-led groups, with years in which funding was not given to black organizations at all. Okay, so this bears repeating because we're in the West End, and all of you are in this room, and you've been here, right? So I need this to resonate with everybody very clearly, and with our guests at the front of the room. Over the course of 27 years, 86% of funding, totaling 13.1 million, has been awarded to 69 white-led groups, while only 11%, totaling 1.6 million, has gone to 12 black-led groups, with years in which the funding was not given to black organizations at all. Yeah. That's why I had to take a nap. Several of them. My colleague Joss also creates a definition of white organizations based on common elements. It's not necessary to have all of them, but you might be a white arts organization if you primarily produce work created by white creators or of the Western canon, especially in core programming. You have a mission that does not address race or ethnic identity. You primarily serve a white audience. You primarily have white staff. You primarily hire white artists. You primarily have a white board. You primarily have white funders. You have white staff leadership and/or founders and white board leadership. Further, an organization which has historically met the above criteria but has made changes more recently may have developed a white culture that perseveres. That is, cultural change can lag other changes. June 2nd, 2020, Alicia Phillip unfriends me on Facebook. Alicia also posts the equity. Okay, she also posts the equity of architecture strategic plan, which does not include the arts. And Susan, you post the solidarity statement on the foundation's website. As Atlantans, we must work to be truly anti-racist. We stand in solidarity with our black, right? Not BIPOC, not POC. They said black. They spelled it right too. It was capital B. All right. So good on you. All right. So we stand in solidarity with our black colleagues, donors, nonprofit partners, and neighbors in our community. We condemn the senseless murders and unjust behavior by some law enforcement and mourn the higher death toll among black Americans from COVID-19. We commit to use our philanthropic capital and our capacity to collaborate throughout the region to end systemic racism and build an equitable community. It must be noted, however, that neither Susan nor Alicia atone publicly for the Foundation's complicity in anti-blackness through its practice of philanthropic redlining. June 10th, 2020, I convened a virtual town hall with Alicia, Susan, and Lita. Over 70 black organizations are represented. During the call, we learned the review committee was white, and you admit to not having a strong connection to the black arts community. Your team also states, we can do pretty much anything. Our only restriction is to nonprofit arts groups in the 23 counties, but we can make exceptions. Susan, by the end of the call, you commit to the following: a meeting with the new CEO, the majority of the $1 million remaining in the Arts Fund's 2020 grant cycle going to black arts groups, a modification to application requirements to qualify a larger pool of black applicants, a task force of diverse black arts and non-arts leaders to set forth an equity agenda for the Arts Fund that prioritizes black arts leaders and organizations and serves as a model for other grant making at the Foundation. June 12th, 2020, Atlanta police officer Garrett Rolfe kills Rashard Boyce. June 26th, the Community Foundation Board announces their new CEO, Frank Fernandez. The headline of the announcement reads, "Second-generation American, humbled and excited to be tapped, cites Foundation as an essential anchor for a thriving community ready to embrace equity of opportunity for all residents." Atlanta Magazine publishes a cover story reflecting on Alicia Phillip's 42-year career and recent push for equity in which the black arts call out is referenced. City Planning Commissioner Tim Keene, in response to the article, tweets, "Thanks for 42 years of not addressing the income gap and racism in Atlanta. Very helpful." I'm gonna assume he was being sarcastic. July 1, Canada Day, the Community Foundation posts new guidelines for the Arts Fund, prioritizing Black-led organizations in which the budget minimum was lowered from $50,000 to $25,000. The requirement for at least one paid full-time W-2 staff member is changed to at least one paid part-time staff member. Audited financial statements are not required, and applicants can request up to 30% of their operating budget versus the usual 10%. I spent the next 3 weeks calling, texting, emailing, dropping DMs. I dropped DMs like a, let me know. I was dropping DMs to every Black arts group that is eligible to apply. As a result, 32 of you submitted applications, most of you for the first time. And I really want to just thank those of you that had a lot of trepidation because of your prior experiences. Like, for you to entrust me in that process, I am forever grateful. August 27, 2020, the foundation awards 28 grants totaling $1.15 million. 22 of the grantees are Black-led and identifying. It's the blackest round of funding in the history of the foundation. One might say it was black as fuck. I just said it. Okay, more importantly, of the 23 white applicants that applied, only 5 of them were funded. This is what racial equity looks like in Atlanta. It's not only saying Black with a capital B, it's prioritizing Black. And the foundation, you have set an important precedent for reparations, and we are not going backwards. In a press release announcing the awards, Frank, you say, "We are moving forward to convene a task force of Black arts leaders in the coming months to continue driving the work of the Arts Fund toward racial equity and boosting arts organizations that focus on creative expression of the Black experience." September 15th, 2020, I host an in-person meet and greet with Frank and the Black arts community at Arts Exchange in East Point. Frank, you referenced a 5-year report on the foundation's distribution of grants, citing that approximately $130 million to $140 million is allocated each year primarily through donor-advised funds, and that we benefit from a tiny fraction of that funding. November 12th, 2020, my birthday, I formed the Atlanta Task Force for Philanthropic Reparations, calling for institutional atonement. I liberate $350,000 for 12 Black arts organizations through the Candida Fund and the Cousins Foundation. December 2020, the Community Foundation appoints 5 new Black board members, but no arts folks. Please note that there were 5 Black folks on the board at the time of the call out in May. February 2021, lead of party, VP of Community is let go and is replaced by Ayana Gabrielle, a Black woman who starts July 1. Ayana was formerly with the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. That same month, Frank, you write an op-ed for the supporter report where you say, while equity may not exclusively be about racial equity, here in the South, in Atlanta, given our history and historical moment, race has to be front and center in any conversation we have about equity. Which brings us to right now. And just to make sure that we're clear, when we're talking about racial equity in this Atlanta Southern context, whose race are we referring to that must be front and center, and who is the we that needs to have the conversation?
All right, so I think you went through the whole history. There's more in here, but we don't have to go through it, so we can just kind of dive into your question. And so, in terms of your first part of your question with respect to who we're talking about, and I think you've led with it, you've highlighted it. We're talking about Black with a capital B.
Yes.
We're leading with that. Now, are we only talking about that? No. We're also talking about other groups in terms of the region, especially since you go outside of Atlanta. But we are focused, given, again, what I said, the history and such, it's Black, it's Latinx, it's Asian, but really, largely, it's about Black. And then Latinx, especially as you get into the other parts of the region.
So you're not talking about white people?
In terms of
Racial equity.
in terms of racial equity?
Yes, I just want to be clear.
Yeah, no, we're talking about, a big part of what we're trying to do is given the history, and you just cited the history that Josh that did, right, in terms of the analysis he did of just specifically around arts philanthropy, we don't have to redress it for white-led groups. We need to recalibrate and be responsive to all the things you said. And so the second question I was a little unclear on, like, who's the they?
Or the we.
The we.
Yeah, you say we have to have the conversation.
So to me, when I use we a lot, and I use it to refer to we as an organization, but we as a broader community, which is to me, in the context of that op-ed, what I was talking about, because it's one thing if it's just us as a community foundation, that's great, but we're one actor, and within philanthropy, there are a lot of other actors that we need to engage, and we really do see that as part of our role, both within the arts and more broadly, is what can we do to forward this conversation with philanthropy, which in Southern philanthropy is in many ways just more conservative than other parts of the country. And so we do feel that part of our role is how do we create a platform to have conversations on race, have conversations about racial equity within the foundation world.
So I gotta say, I was a little bit taken aback when I saw this this blog post yesterday on the Community Foundation. I think it was posted yesterday afternoon. It's a mid-year status update. It's got a black woman on the front. So I got intrigued. This is a black dancer from Dan's Canvas, but then I read the article and then I was no longer intrigued. I got upset actually, because given all that you've said and that you have said of the past year about prioritizing black, all of a sudden there's no reference of us at all in this blog post. So this blog post, like I said, is an update on the Arts Fund, and then it goes on to talk about the Arts Fund 2021 cycle, which is also curious that that's posted given that this conversation was happening. So we haven't weighed in, but there's been a decision to put the grant cycle up and to start taking applications.
Sure. So on the blog post, and Katrina DeBerry, who is the author of that, is here, and so she can give you some context if you're interested in terms of the blog post and what she's doing. With respect to the second thing, we did do an open round of getting feedback, because we've done multiple feedback sessions, including one before this, which, and Katrina, correct me if I'm wrong, we invited everyone that's been part of our distribution list of the arts groups to participate in that, to get feedback, to continue to be responsive to some of the things we started, I guess, last summer in terms of how we make it a more accessible application process. So we did provide an opportunity and forum for that. Am I correctly stating that, Katrina?
Actually, Katrina, I'm sorry, just hold on one second. So we're talking about equity, right? And so that we've invited you to participate. I'm pretty certain of the survey that you did, the webinar, because I was in attendance at the webinar, the listening sessions that Karanda has done. I know you don't have the critical voice of the Black arts community. I know you don't have the majority of the people in the room that's weighed in. And that was the problem with the Arts Fund in their first round. They invited. It's an open application, you're invited, but we weren't there. So how are we doing this work differently? It sounds like we're not. What's happening?
So you tell me then, in terms of, we have this process, and just to get everyone else up to speed, so you're familiar with Conranda Baker, who we've hired to help us rethink our arts strategic framework, as well as how we better integrate equity and racial equity specifically into our arts strategy. So she started to reach out to different folks and stakeholders within the arts community to gather that feedback.
Yeah.
So if there are things that we can do with her, because that's in process now, to make sure we engage as many people here as possible, we want to do that. So we're open. One of the two things I want to say.
I did it for you.
Yep.
Here we are. Here we are. So this was scheduled with you more than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You posted those guidelines yesterday. Here we are. Here are the voices that you need to weigh in. Here it is. I packaged it for you. All you had to do was show up. That's it.
Great. Fair enough. And I think we're happy to hear all the feedback that folks want to provide today. We're happy to do that as well as we continue that process. So if folks have feedback and haven't been able to provide it as it relates to our grant cycle we're all ears. Katrina, who's managing the process, is here as well, so happy to, again, take any questions.
I don't know how many of us have been included in that number. No one contacted me, and I'm on the list. And so I don't know if others on the list were I'd love to know who in this group was contacted, so we can get a perspective on who is
Who was contacted?
Raise your hand.
I don't know.
I didn't see something from Manga, and there has been some webinars. However, when I began to discuss the issues of why it was so wrong that for so many years, we've been in existence for 16 years, and this was the first time that we had the opportunity to get funding. I've tried to apply to the Community Foundation for a year, and the only thing that will keep us out, no matter what else, was because we didn't have audit. We didn't have the funding to do the audit. We was busy on programming. And this was the first opportunity, and I was told, okay, well, this is not the time for that. We're gonna talk about that on next Friday. And I'm too busy, so I didn't have time to come back.
And I'm not available on Friday either.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want us to get bogged down. I just want to communicate something that's amiss here. I get you're happy to help. Y'all were happy to help last year in May 2020 when you made the round of, y'all are happy people, I get it. But you're not listening, right? This was orchestrated to provide you with what you needed to make the decisions that would not make you look like a hypocrite, right? You're saying racial equity here, but then you're posting this blog and we're not referenced. You say we're a priority, but you're not delivering on that, right? You did it when the optic didn't look good and everyone was watching. And now that everyone is sort of back to traffic and work and that sort of thing, you know, you're assuming that we're not gonna hold you accountable. And like, this is where things have to shift because there are actually lives at stake here.
I'm wondering if there was not even a consideration, given that this meeting was already pre-planned 2 weeks ago, would it not have been valuable to wait a few days before posting that to get that feedback from all of these viable arts organizations?
What can we do to just pause on the grant cycle?
Well, one, I would love to hear, we have you all here, what is some of the feedback, and we can summarize some of the feedback we've gotten to be responsive, like, ma'am, you made the point earlier about the audit requirements, so that has been changed. But wanting to hear more feedback in terms of what are the things that we can do to make the application process more accessible.
Well, I think what's challenging about it is y'all just posted it yesterday.
Right, it's an afterthought. We're an afterthought.
I mean, you just posted it yesterday, today is Tuesday, and none of these folks have had an opportunity to sort of weigh in what you have posted. This meeting was convened in response to the webinar that I participated in, and from the few questions that I posed to you, right? The question around what's your definition of racial equity? You didn't have one yet for the foundation. But you're doing racial equity work and you're getting funding tied to racial equity. It was in response to the question posed to Katrina, why do you have a $25,000 budget minimum? What is that based in? She had no response. I see in this application you've removed it, but it gives me very little confidence that these things are based in anything substantial that comes from this community that you continue to ignore.
So I would, and Katrina, you may have some of the specifics in terms of how we have changed our application process from when the original meetings happened about a year ago to today. There are, to me, very concrete things, and we can walk through them if that's helpful, the steps we've taken. And part of this is we want to continue to hear that. So we're open to that. I guess to your point, in all honesty, in terms of this meeting, when you reached out about it, it would have been helpful. I didn't know that this was what you wanted to talk about. We would have happy to engage at that point. But again, please, and I don't know if you want to take questions or not, I want to be responsive to specific points or feedback folks have, since to your point, we are here and we are listening.
Yeah, so one of the specific points is to pause the application so you can do the due diligence to get the feedback to make an application that's about fairness and equity. That's actually about that, right? And I know that Karanda she still has listening sessions scheduled even this week. So you're going ahead and you haven't even captured all of the feedback and information. Amara, yeah.
So the thing I'd like to share is to maybe kill the elephant in the room a little bit, Heather, is I would really charge, and be transparent, Susan and I are friends, so we've had conversations, and so we've had conversations about this. But I think what the arts community, and particularly the Black arts community, is experiencing, and Frank, I was skeptical, but I'm hopeful of what is possible, is a culture of non-inclusion of African Americans, or excuse me, Black Americans, however you want to phrase it, throughout the organization. So the ripple effect of what has been experienced is something that I would dare to say that community organizations have experienced, that others throughout, so I think that, and I say this lovingly, but I would encourage both from the board level and permeating throughout the organizations, because I think it's very telling that we've had 3 individuals who were in senior leadership positions within the Community Foundation now feel the freedom to be Black first and not a Community Foundation employee and not to be silenced, whatever that looks like. So I would really encourage, because it's part of the Atlanta way, is to bring forth the same Black folks that are comfortable. And we can't allow for the Community Foundation, just as we should not allow for our political leadership, to continue with the Atlanta way. So my encouragement, I'm encouraged by Brian Wilson being added to the board. I hope that he will speak up in ways that he has traditionally done. But I would encourage from the board leadership to get the non-traditional Black folks that show up everywhere in leadership roles because they are asked, to look at others across the board, and that Frank, through your leadership, that you really begin to permeate what real equity can look like, and inclusion of the entire Atlanta community on every level. So from the art and cultural space to the community spaces, because I would dare to say, my friends, that if we went to grassroots Black communities, they have also not felt embraced by the Community Foundation. And I think that we're at a critical juncture right now where you all have the opportunity, and I say this having spent time for 3 years working with the Chicago Community Club and seeing the leadership. I'd say tap into Terry Muzaney and the leadership that was involved in terms of shifting the entire culture, where diversity was not just about Black people being shown up, but diversity and inclusion and equity throughout the region that they serve and throughout the region that you all serve is a way of life and a way of engagement and a way of business as usual for the Community Foundation, so that Black organizations in every strata of this region feel heard, valued, opportunities existing through the Community Foundation.
Yeah.
What are the obstacles?
The obstacles
Because it
to,
seems like we've been having this conversation for, I'm 58. So, you know, I was in my love, I was at the March on Washington strolling. So, it's like, what are the obstacles? How is taking so long?
Talk to us.
so the obstacles for us are, or the obstacles, because we've heard a lot of the obstacles.
No,
we've
from
tried to
you,
address.
because you're not gonna be able to solve everything.
Yeah,
Just
what's getting in the way for you all?
Okay, what's the obstacle?
As the two, you're the top.
Even said that y'all can do whatever y'all want, so y'all are the lead decision makers for the organization.
Here's what so let's start, I don't need a mic. If Amara doesn't need a mic, I don't need a mic. I'm just gonna go with it.
It's for the people in the back.
Oh, well, okay, as long as it's not for Amara. Thank you for reading, you read everything except my op-ed, and I'll hold you to that. This past year, what you did for us was needed. So even if I don't like to hear that this organization did not live up to what it said it was, I needed to hear it. It is not my job, right? I've been involved for 3 years with this organization. It's not acceptable for us to not know. It's not acceptable for us not to embrace you as a community. It's not acceptable for us not to have the people on staff. And by God, we have one person who's gonna be doing all this. So culture change, right? We had an equity of our opportunity architecture that never mentioned the word equity, and it certainly never mentioned the word race. It does now. We are in the middle of a strategic plan, which Frank is leading. We are hiring senior level staff reporting to Frank who are Black, who are female, and who are part of the community. We are intentionally moving forward. We are insisting on talking about race and what that means with regards to Atlanta. And we are doing this in a pandemic where nobody is back in the office, not an obstacle, just part of life. In the meantime, right, we are not getting it right. And that is a disappointment to me to be here to hear this, right? I read that application today. I love Katrina and I love Frank and I love this organization, and I can also say I read it like you did. I didn't see anything in there about race or racial equity or Black arts organizations. So what I mean when I say we can do anything is we can do the right thing. It is never too late to do the right thing. It'd be great if we got it right every time, but I don't think that that's the standard.
And right now confronted with what you,
We're not confronted, we're discussing it.
Yeah.
It's a sacred space, so
no,
let's
no, no,
talk about
that's not what I meant when I said sacred. I definitely said it's not a safe space, but in dealing with what is before you now, specific to the Arts Fund, because I get organizationally, big picture, what needs to be done, but we've got this thing in front of us, and you're moving on it, right? You're moving on it. The application is up. What are we going to do with this application, given that these folks have not weighed in?
So happy to consider positive. And just as a part of the rationale, so you all know, in terms of why we're wanting to move forward with the application process, was because one, we know we're going to do additional grant making cycles later this year, but also two things. One, we've heard from a lot of arts groups, including some of the folks here, that there's a big need for arts funding to get out to groups because there's a lot, of all the challenges that you're all aware of over the last year. So wanting to get...
There's always a need for funding. There's never not a need.
Yeah, but it's been a while. In terms of what we're hearing directly from the groups. So that's part of why we are. Secondly, in terms of trying to, what are the obstacles, I think we've tried to demonstrate both in the last round of funding we did, our commitment to racial equity and Black-led arts groups, as well as some of the things that Heather highlighted that we've been doing across the organization to bring a much stronger racial equity lens to our grant making, right? So if you look at, for example, those parts of our grant making that we have more control over, like the COVID Response and Recovery Fund, the last 3 rounds, since I've been here, over 70% of those have gone to BIPOC-led groups, mostly Black groups. And so it is not that we will not be bringing a strong racial equity lens to this cycle. We will. But we were trying to balance the need for funding from what we've heard from the arts community and still moving forward with the strategy which Conrad has been doing, and I'm hearing loud and clear from all of you that we need to do a better job of engaging you all in different ways so that you feel like you are participating in that process and are informing that process as we move forward. So, sir, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Frank, you mentioned that the Arts Fund represents just a very small amount of the money that the Community Foundation manages. And so what can be done to educate your donor funds as to the needs of these organizations? I had a situation, I'm not going to say what the arts organization is, but they were in dire need of funding. And I introduced them to someone who had a family foundation. And they have now become an angel for this organization and helps to keep them afloat. So what can you do to get access to that bigger pot of money? We're here talking about $1 million, $2 million, but the donor advised funds are way bigger. And over the time that Lisa and Alicia ran the Arts Fund, we could never get them to introduce any of the projects of these organizations to the donor advised fund. They would just not do it.
May I piggyback on that?
Sure, and I'll respond to both because it's a really important point.
Because a part of what I was thinking right now is not just you personally, but also your staff. And I'm wondering what level of engagement or involvement you've had with any of the organizations in this room, right? So it's one thing to
Fahamu's asking the question about this is great because when we did the virtual town hall, you said you didn't have a connection with the Black arts community, quote. And so it'd be interesting in the follow-up to say, what is your relationship now and how do you characterize that relationship?
So I want to start there and then come back here. So Camille, you raised a great point. So a lot of the funds that we give out or grant out on an annualized basis are through donor-advised funds, and we have with those funds, the donor decides where it goes. And one of the things that, to Susan's point earlier, that we are really focused on right now as part of our strategic plan is how do we create better alignment and opportunities for co-investment with our donors, where we are putting forward this equity agenda and sharing with them, here are some of the programs and nonprofits that we think you should support, and proactively creating those opportunities and framing it and really understanding what the things they care about so that we can align with those groups that are interested in the arts and being able to provide, again, a better balance than we historically have, because we have not done a good job of that in terms of Black-led as well as other people of color-led nonprofits and then arts groups in particular here. So it is a big focus. I'll be honest, it's not something we can solve overnight, but something we are very focused on right now, because we think we could really have a big impact if we're able to convince more and more of our donors over time to really focus on these issues. So in getting back to the question you had around you framed a little differently what I heard him saying, but I just want to make sure I'm characterizing. You spoke to what connection do we have to the Black arts community, and part of it is we've lost our arts expertise, so we're having to rebuild that, and we're using this process that Karan is leading to help do that and figure out how we, for example, bring back.
She didn't have that relationship either. Just no, FYI.
Well, no, she's not. That's not her role. But her role is to help us develop a strategy so that we can do that.
Oh, I'm just referring to Lisa Kremen. She didn't have that relationship either.
Yeah, no, she did. She just had the arts background. I'm talking about in terms of Karan working with us to develop the strategy, bring the equity lens, and then develop that. So, for example, one of the things that I know we've heard in some of the listening sessions that I think a few of you have already participated in is that we used to have an advisory committee that was hopefully more reflective. I don't know how reflective it was, but will be more reflective of the arts community. And so, needing to reinstitute that and really bring that focus, because we don't. And it's not something we're going to solve overnight. But we recognize that and need to address it. I want to make sure that
on the advisory committee, I was on it. And it just didn't work, because to me, it was like the decisions had been made ahead of time.
27 years. We don't want to do anything you did 27 years.
Another thing that I saw that happened was that the white organizations were not held accountable for their lack of diversity and lack of equity, even though there was in the application, there was something where they were supposed to be accountable. And I remember asking, why do you even have in the application if you're not going to hold them to it? There's just a lot that has to be addressed.
And that's great feedback, Camille.
Actually, I'm sorry, y'all. Hold on, I'm sorry. I don't want to co-opt this, but I don't want this to be like us nitpicking about little things, because there's some big level things that we need to discuss here. So I want to get to that. Because this question of pausing the application, that's the big one that needs to happen before we leave today, right? That's really important, because this isn't it. You haven't gotten it.
Heather.
Yep. Yeah.
So, greetings everybody. I'm Tambra Harris, the Artistic Director of BY and I wanted to just talk about that point and frame it from the perspective of undoing white supremacist concepts that have infiltrated all of our organizations, all of our spaces, all of our places. And one of those white supremacist mentalities, concepts, is to have an agenda and stick to the agenda no matter what. And so the way that we undo that is to recognize, yes, we've had an agenda, but now we have the opportunity to listen to the pulse of the room, right? And sometimes that's a Zoom room. Sometimes that is a classroom. And in this case, it's this kind of forum. And so I'm bringing that up as a concept around undoing white supremacist concepts because of how much those concepts have infiltrated and impacted our people on a day-to-day basis. And so when we're able to think of it conceptually, then we can take out the fear of saying, you know what, we did do that wrong. Because we've all been impacted by white supremacist mentality, all of us. And we all have to undo it. And so to Mama Camille's point, in terms of how to reach the donors and how to shift that narrative or those actions, right? There are plenty of organizations that literally spend their time teaching other organizations how to undo shit. Yes. And one of those is the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They do an amazing job because not only are we talking about race and equity, but we're literally talking about anti-racism. Right. And most often when Black people show up, I'm gonna talk about myself. When I show up to race and equity stuff, I'm looking to hear some anti-racism verbiage as well. Because that's very, very specific to me. And so all of this is all messy. It's messy not because of who you are as a person, it's messy because America is just messy. Yeah. And racism is messy. And so a forum like this gives you the opportunity to just say, we did that wrong. That's it. And we gonna pause. That's right. That's right. And reevaluate better. And there's a great level of humility that has to take place in order for that to happen. And that's a part of that white supremacist stuff. Yes. Being able to just come down off of that high horse and just be able to humble yourself to the people in this space. And not think from the shoulders up, but literally connect with us with our hearts. Which is why it's important for when Jabri is playing his drums for us to get up and clap. Because we're connected from the heart. And as artists, that's what we do. And so we're asking just to examine that pattern of existing from the shoulders up, which is very mental. Come to this from your heart space. Be committed to dismantling white supremacist concepts inside of your organization. Being able to name those things. Revisit your agenda. Say, you know what? No, we didn't consider y'all. Come to the table. We didn't do it. And just know that as Black people, we don't hear that enough. At all. Like we be like, yeah, I'm happy to do that, but we messed that up. Right. We did that all wrong, and we about to redo this. That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you. We'll just take a moment of silence as you consider it.
there she is in the back there.
Okay,
So,
here we go.
The woman who spoke earlier with the dance company, so Tambra. So what I would say is, we got it wrong, and I'm going to tell you we're going to get it wrong again, but we're going to keep trying to figure it out. So we'll go ahead and hit pause. And what I'd like to do. What I'd like to do is go ahead, based on the feedback we've gotten tonight, is host a session. We're explicitly focused on this, right? So we can hear concerns. And I'm happy to do it in person, via Zoom or both, right? Make people comfortable. We want to do it, quickly, because I do want to be responsive, because some of the groups in this room and outside of this room who are Black-led groups have also said there's an urgency. So I want to be responsive to that. So want to be able to do that. And I am happy, I know Heather can connect us, but also want to offer you all the opportunity to reach out directly to us. And I can give you my email, because we'll go ahead and set this up and get it moving sooner rather than later, so we can hear that. We'll engage and incorporate Conranda, who's been working, and some of you have met already, into that process. So to get a hold of me, actually the best way to get a hold of me is via email. And it's pretty easy. It's just fernandez@cfgreateratlanta.org. And Heather has my information, so she also can share that. But just so you guys have it directly, if you all are interested in reaching out directly and sharing your information. But our commitment is to hit pause, host a session until we can continue to hear feedback, and we can also clearly in that share some of what we've already done in terms of changing it, and then get additional feedback in terms of what other things you all, from your perspective, can address some of the barriers that you continue to see as part of that process. So.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving. One of the promises made to us was around this Black Taskforce. And I wanted to just ask the membership of your task force and what you all have accomplished to date.
So the membership, there has been a task force, and I talked to Heather about this when she formed her task force, and at the time, we did not feel like it made sense for us to form a separate task force, given that she had just stood this one up. And so we've been, and Heather has periodically shared some of her feedback. One of the things that we are trying to do and actively thinking about, and again, we're open to some of the feedback that you all may provide, is how do we think through and make sure we bring a racial equity lens to all the work we do. We had some initial conversations, both at the staff level and at the board level, about the best way to do that. And in fact, I remember having this conversation with Heather around forming a Black task force that wouldn't just be about ours, it'd be more broadly. And after a lot of conversations, one of the things that board and staff came to is, if we put it in a little box here, it's just going to be in the box here. It needs to permeate everything. And that's one of the things that we're working on. We're in the process. We started last November with a comprehensive DEI racial equity assessment of our organization, and having that conversation with the person in the group that we're working with to think that through. And so, to your point, we haven't formed a task force. I think we're using this process now that Fernandez is leading to gather as much feedback, think through how we form an advisory committee, make sure it has that lens, it has the appropriate representation to make sure we're addressing these issues.
In that op-ed that you did for Supporter Report in February, you liken equity to fairness, this idea that everyone deserves a fair shot at a decent life, right? When we think about I want to bring that back up as I ask you some very specific questions about money. When we look at the history of the Arts Fund, right? Because we haven't reconciled for that just yet, the 27 years. Last year was an effort in a direction, but we've got many years that we've got to account for. And there are several organizations that have been around for 20 plus years that haven't been able to scale because of that disinvestment, frankly, in their community. So, as we think about reparations, because that's what we're talking about as it relates to fairness, I have some very specific questions. Bye, Waverly. So, I've learned from my folks at Woodruff that the Arts Fund received $1 million in 2019 from the Coke Company for racial equity work related to the arts. Is this true?
Yes.
Okay, what have you all done with that money so far? Has it been allocated?
So we are planning to, this is why some of the work that Conrad is doing to help inform how those funds get allocated.
Okay, so we've got $1 million sitting there. Someone keep track of the math, okay? Okay. According to the Foundation's press release on December 10, 2020, Facebook awarded you $1 million to, quote, support Black businesses, creators, and nonprofits. You go on to say the investment will be used in the formation of a fund that seeks to disrupt and dismantle the structures and systems of racism that produce disparate outcomes for Black residents in Atlanta. I was like, it just only costs $1 million to do that? Well, goddamn. And the shape of the fund includes investment focus that will be shaped in partnership with civil community leaders, and that an announcement about this will be made in early 2021. So it's July. Where are we at?
So in terms of the Facebook dollars, our intention is to allocate a portion directly to the arts, and you've heard me say this before, but for the broader group. But we also have big meetings and had similar meetings with folks who are in public health, in education, housing, and other areas. And so part of what we're developing now, as Susan alluded to earlier, our broader strategic plan is how we use those dollars and how much of those dollars get deployed specifically to the arts vis-a-vis the rest of the issue areas that we're trying to have an impact on. So that's in process.
So those other areas that will have an impact, does that have anything Black experience on that, even from housing and all of those things?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that in somewhere written or print, online or document?
Well, it's part of our agreement with Facebook. We have to do that. Yes.
But it has to be for racially, support Black.
The Facebook dollars specifically to Black, to be clear.
No matter what arena that it's in, the arts.
Exactly. And no matter what, it's focused on, as she said, they gave flexibility in terms of the different issue areas, but very explicitly focused on supporting Black-led and Black communities.
I just want to note there's this urgency in response to the arts community to get this grant application out, get this grant application, and you're sitting on some big pots of money, and you're taking a lot of time. I just want to note that. I just want to note that. One more piece of funding. Mackenzie Scott posted the Arts Fund as a recipient of funding a couple of weeks ago. Is this true?
Yes, it is.
How much were you awarded?
So we were awarded $2 million.
And how exhaustive was the application process to get that money?
There is no application process.
You just got money. Oh, hold on. Y'all, I'm trying to tee this up. Okay, so $2 million. Are y'all keeping track of the math? Okay, what were the stipulations of the grant that you received?
For Mackenzie Scott,
Yeah.
it was unrestricted. It was to the Arts Fund, so it has to be within the arts, and beyond that's basically pretty much unrestricted. It's up to us.
Did you elect to receive the money all up front or spread out over several years?
We got it up front.
Oh, you got it already?
Yeah.
It's in your bank, okay. Okay, so that's, okay, so let's go back to what you said about equity and fairness and this idea that everyone deserves a fair shot at a decent life and that your foundation has a legacy of leaving us out. So you have money, you have unrestricted money for arts, you have a climate, you've got a climate right now that is in favor of racial equity, and even your organization has centered in plan and name and other ways equity, racial equity specifically, that we now understand, very specifically Black people.
Yes.
With a capital B.
But not exclusively, but primarily, just to be clear.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to.
Oh yeah, primarily. I get that like 87% is like primarily. Right? That's a great example. Like 87% of the money primarily went to white organizations. What are we going to do to reconcile the past?
Yes.
So,
what are we going to do? And how do we do it swiftly?
Yeah, so part of it is, so a couple of things. We pause the process, get more feedback on the application process. We are also incorporating intentionally, because we just, on the Mackenzie Scott dollars, she said, I only got a anonymous call like a couple weeks ago about it, so it's all brand new information for us as well. So we are, again, this is part of why we're working with Camarada to get feedback and help develop our framework so that we can be responsive to all this and get your feedback about how those dollars and some of these other dollars can be allocated. So we're actively working on that, and this is part of why we were trying, and then I know where we're pausing, but why we wanted to get around going, because we wanted to get dollars out the door, and we're trying to balance this urgency. So that's part of the push and pull that we feel.
Has the $4 million been earmarked yet?
So no, it is, so of that $4 million that was discussed, all of it except for the million for Facebook, which a portion will go to the arts, is for the arts fund, and so that's all fair play in terms of these conversations we're having.
So that means $3 million has been earmarked for the arts fund.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What are the obstacles